I think, and it's really important to think about sound. We're so used that there's always sound. We can't close our ears like we can close our eyes. Even if we sleep, we hear. And it's so common, we never think about when some sound has to be created. And for virtual environments, there is no sound at all. Spatial audio, it's not just a technical enhancement, but it's a fundamental aspect of how we perceive and connect with those virtual environments.
Welcome to a new episode of XR and AI Spotlight, the show that gives the stage to the founders and makers pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli, I'm your host, and I'm here today with Jelmer Althuis. Jelmer is the founder of Sphere of Sound, a company dedicated to crafting cutting-edge audio solutions that redefine immersive experiences. He also served as the audio director at VRelax, where he specializes in designing therapeutic audio landscapes that enhance mental well-being through virtual reality. He is a true practitioner with over a decade of experience and has a lot to share and teach about what makes sound real.
There are a lot of aspects and properties of audio to make it sound real. And the properties are not only localization, so that it's coming from a sound source from the left or the right, but it has to do with occlusion, for example, the way other materials stand between you and the sound source. It's about reverberation. It has to do with intensity and the way you put a cup on the table, it sounds always different.
The production workflow, including the recording process, the best library and SDK that you can use right now.
You have websites like where a lot of indies upload their sound libraries where you can get the right sound. And there's also something like, but also companies like and with really, really good sound recordings. In Unity, I make a lot of use of the because I think and I find that's the best sounding spatializer at the moment.
And the impact sound can have on users and inhabitants of virtual worlds.
For mental wellness, placing people with telepresence in other nature environments. If the sound isn't real, people don't get relaxed or not that fast. But if everything is correct and the sound environment is convincing, within 10 minutes using VRelax, they had like a stress decrease with 40%. So that's huge.
But before we get into it, I wanted to thank our sponsor Meshi, who made this episode possible. Meshi is a real powerhouse for generating 3D assets with AI. You can start with a simple text or image prompt and get high-quality stylized 3D models in just a minute. One feature I personally love is the ability to create stylized texture for any mesh, with or without UV. And since the release, Meshi's teams keep pushing amazing updates like texture inpainting, ultra-realistic sculpture, and the ability to rig and animate your character. To try it out, go to meshi.ai and start the 7 days trial to access all these incredible features. And now it's time to roll the title and welcome Jelmer under the spotlight. Jelmer, it is a real pleasure to have you here today.
Wow. Thank you, Gabriel. Nice introduction.
Absolutely. You deserve it. We talked in the past, and I believe we just scratched the surface of what sound is in immersive experience. So I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to just dive right in this topic.
Cool.
What are the properties of sound that make it sound real?
Wow. Yeah, that's not a short answer, I can say. And I mean, you mean real for virtual environments, for virtual reality, I guess.
That makes it believable once you step into this fully virtual environment. Let's start there, and I know that we will diverge and expand on that, but for now, let's tackle this first.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of aspects and properties of audio to make it sound real. And that's just like in real life. And what I'm trying to do in virtual reality is try to make a sound as real as possible, just like in real life. And the properties are not only localization, so that it's coming from a sound source from the left or the right or up or down, but it's also has to do with occlusion, for example, the way other materials stand between you and the sound source. It's about reverberation, the reflection of sound waves through the air. by bouncing against the walls or the ceiling or the ground. It has to do with intensity and the way if you put a cup on the table, it sounds always different. And it depends on how hard you put it on the surface, and that's the intensity it's being placed on the surface, for example. And it has to also do with frequency responses. I mean, if you have sounds in the lower frequency range, they travel further than the higher frequency range. So when you hear a concert, for example, or a live performance from a distance, mainly you will hear only the low end, and high end are the highest frequencies. You can hear not that much from a really far distance. So basically a collection of all things that are influencing the way we hear sound, and of course the way how we perceive sound, because sound, as you know, it's a vibration. It's traveling through the air, and it's nothing more than air vibration, and we only make it a sound in our brains. At the moment, it comes in our ear and our eardrum, and then the membranes will translate it to the dipolarization, hyperpolarization, and so getting into a nerve system, and then we interpret the sound waves or the vibration as a sound. And the way we interpret it, this also has to do with psychoacoustics. For example, and that's something like reverberation is really important, or yeah, the meaning of certain sounds, and that are all aspects that are really important to make sound real. Yeah.
So there is then consequently a level of complexity of adding so many variables that you described, right? I mean, I can imagine that something like occlusion, indeed, the reverb, so how the sound bounce in a cave compared to a room, it's
Mhm.
dramatically different.
Yeah.
The other thing I haven't thought about is also that aspect about the intensity, indeed, right? So when you are pushing something or moving something, depending on how strong or how heavy that movement is, that might also have an effect. So many variables. I want to go into that and discussing how developers teams can actually start implementing those and look at it. But before we get into it, I have a question regarding the type of sound, because it's not just about a sound effect, right? Sounds, it's everything. It can be indeed voices, it can be music, right? So how do you manage, differentiate, combine them? I mean, can you tell us about not just creating a sound effect, but more of a soundscape?
Yeah, sure. Well, the way I work at Sphere Sound, and also with VRelax, I start usually with the pre-production phase, and that's reading about what's the target of the game or the experience we have to create. And then the whole aspect of how we can use sound. Could we use it, for example, in a functional manner? Do we need sounds to focus or to get the attention to navigate, for example? Or do we use sound to yeah, work on our feelings, to get emotionally reactions? Yeah, so I divide it in certain categories. And you got the sound effects, and it's a large category with the sound, with the ambience, with other sound effects, with Foley, um, and that's telling something of the world around us. So that's giving information and telling the language or the story for the environment we're in. If we see a tree, we want to hear like rustling leaves, for example, or bird songs. Those are in the trees. Um, And then you got the voice, for example. It could be used to give us information. So then a voiceover or a narrative is going to tell the story or telling us important information about something. So that's another category I use to lay on top on the ambience, for example. And
Sorry,
then,
Jelmer, I have a follow up question on that tree,
yeah.
right? So let's imagine that you do have that tree with a bird on top, right? Maybe there is a little bit of wind. And you mentioned two different ways in which this could be done, right? So imagine if there is a navigation element, right?
Mhm.
Maybe it's an immersive experience that per se requires of, okay, we need to go from A to B in that specific environment. And maybe there is another case where instead it has to have more of an emotional trigger. Would you make the sound of that tree and that environment sound different? And if so, how?
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, definitely. I always use the example if you have like a one shot, one visual screenshot of a dark forest, for example. And with sound, you can place that shot in different environments. If you play like city sounds on the background, the whole forest has been placed near a city. It could be a park. If you play like seashore sound, it's being placed at the seashore, for example. So that's place and destination. But you can also use time or different time with sounds. For example, if you play a horse on the background and a wagon, then it's probably in the early days. And if you play a UVO sound, for example, then it's in the future. And we still have the same shot of that dark forest. But also the type of wind. What kind of feeling do you want? Is it the scary boss forest? Then I would rather use like a scary howling wind instead of a soft wind. And for bird songs, we are so when we hear bird songs, for example, it's evolutionary determined that if we hear bird songs, there's nothing on hand. It's all good. It's all fine. But and there's no predator. There's no storm coming. But as soon as it's quiet, when there are no birds and you're only hearing wind, well, there could be a storm. There could be a predator. So the amount of fear is higher. And in
Right.
this way, yeah, you can, but also, and that's only with sound effects, but you can exaggerate that, of course, with musical themes.
Of course. So when then having a library, right, of these sounds that needs to be used in these experiences, right?
Yeah.
Are there some considerations that are, for example, important when capturing or generating this sound that maybe is different from just a movie, for example? So the broader question is, how do you make these specific sounds? Is that something you get or something that you record yourself? And if when you do, when that happens, is that something different that makes it different from standard to the sound of, let's say, a movie or a TV show?
Yeah, well, for VR definitely is because if I'm making spatial audio, then I have to take into account first of all the whole direction, but also the reverberation. Because spatial audio isn't just localized sounds around us; it's also giving us a feeling of externalization. So the sound is coming from beyond our speakers on our headphone or our speaker system. Um, and that's difficult enough because in real life it's all difficult to hear a sound just in front or right in the back of us. Yeah, we have to make slightly head movements to learn that where the sound is, to localize the sound. And the same applies with the height localization of sound. And that's also because we humans have the ears on one axis. But owls, for example, they have like different height ears. The left ear is lower than the right ear, so they are far more better than localizing height, for example. And that has to do with the three. Yeah, you have like interaural time difference, interaural level difference, and interaural phase differences, and that's the way we can localize our sound. Yeah? If I click here, for example, on my right side, the sound is time difference first in my right ear and just a millisecond later in my left ear. Same applies for the level of the sound when I click here. And there's some phase issues of phase shifting because the sound wave is coming in another angle in my right ear than in my left ear. So that are important things to know, but for localizing those sounds. But then you have also the reverberation, for example, which is really important to place it in the right environment. Yeah, if you're in a forest and I'm recording, for example, I've recorded a bird in the open field, then I don't have that bird with the reverberation of all the trees standing in the way or the occlusion is over there. So I try to use as clean and as high quality sounds as possible to put it in the right environment. And as soon as it's being placed into the right environment, in a virtual environment, it could be like in a Unity or Unreal Engine as a sound source, I apply EQing or reverberation to make it sound that it's with the right reverberation, as is the bed layer of the ambisonics file, for example, so that it
Right.
places in the right direction. Yeah.
So let's say that one option is indeed to record, let's say, sound that is clean. So let's imagine, for example, it could be something breaking, right? Some bricks breaking, for example.
Yeah.
Then this is something that you can simulate in a studio, trying to. And do you kind of like exclude the reverberation? Do you use something specific to record the cleanest sound possible, let's say?
Yeah, of course, you want so clean as possible. So, first of all, using high quality mics, preferably with a high sample rate, because the higher the sample rate, the more samples it gets the real analog wave. The highest quality is guaranteed, and if you have to pitch it down, for example, the quality still remains at a good quality. And of course, in a room where you have no sound bleed of other stuff going on, so people. If I do field recording, for example, the worst thing can happen is that there is going to fly a plane over, or there are people coming asking me what I do. And traffic in Holland is also a big
Of
problem.
course.
Yeah,
Of course. And so let's imagine then, okay, if that's possible, that's great. That means also that there is a sort of like dedication to capture the right sound. But let's
hmm
imagine that it's a small team, right?
yeah.
And maybe there is not the big budget for sounds.
hmm
So how can people get their hands on that sound? Are there libraries? Can they generate it synthetically? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, you could use sound libraries, and there's a lot of commercial companies making libraries, but also a lot of freelancers. If you have websites like soundeffect.com, for example, where a lot of indies upload their sound libraries where you can get the right sounds. There's also something like freesound.org. I would not recommend that, though it could be of some use, but the quality difference between all the sounds is so huge that you're spending a lot of time searching for the right sound, which probably or maybe not even is findable on those websites. So having to invest in a commercial but high quality sound library, yeah, that 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 would be recommended. And then you got like a lot of sound. Thomas Rex Beverly, for example, makes beautiful sounds. Acoustic Nature, George Flatt, but also companies like Boom Library and Pro Sound Effects are companies with really good sound recordings. And most of those sounds are raw, which mean that you can edit them afterward in post production to fit in at the right way. And most of the times when you are doing sound design or making sounds for objects that doesn't exist, because in virtual worlds digital assets are not sound
Exactly.
sources.
If you got a laser gun,
Yeah,
what are you going to do?
yeah, for example, I call Ben Hurt and no, you can recreate those sounds using all layers of animal sounds, but also metallic sounds, for example, and you layer them in a specific way that you got enough low frequency, high mid frequency, and high frequency ranges, so that yeah, it sounds pleasing and convincing. Yeah.
Of course. So One, since we are here, we are talking about generating sound, right? I think you know where I'm going. When it's about your experience with, for example, generative AI for generating that kind of sound, either
Yeah.
being sound effect or maybe music or maybe voices, is there something that it's somehow usable, or you have experimented with it? Where do we stand there?
Yeah. I have two different thoughts about that. Um, the first one, I start positive. I would definitely like to have AI creating procedural generated sound effects. For example, when you have like a game environment, when there's when you see a forest, for example, or clouds, or a field, a meadow, or something like that, then it would save huge of time to have procedural generated those sound effects that fit the environment. But the complexity of sounds, which I told you, that has to do with occlusion, reverb, intensity, frequency responses. Um, it's difficult and complex in the real world, let alone making an algorithm for it. So I think I have to wait a few years before that one's coming. Um, and then the other way, yeah, for music, yeah, the difficulty there is that the current models creating sound has been or music from AI. Um, in my opinion, they steal from the artists that have created their music, and maybe stealing is not the right word, but yeah, no,
We know
being,
that there is the whole copyright issue
yeah,
that is
and
one of the
it's
problem for sure.
it yeah, it could be good, and if you say like it should be free, then I can agree. But then I think if you're on that point, then everything should be free. Then my food should also be free. Uh, you know, because it doesn't make sense. Artists are working hard to get their loan, but if that stuff is free, then they have to eat as well. So that's my other thought about it. The same, yeah,
But then is that so? I use there are two different elements to this.
yeah,
So with generative sound, there is the copyright issue, and that is true, and that is there, and I agree. And that could be a deliberate choice of no, I will not adopt it because I am against it.
mhm,
Clear. The other one is it's usable or not, to what extent and for what.
yeah,
Because again, I think that also in depending on the type of production, depending on the kind of use cases, we have it that maybe something that is AI generated does a good enough job in some places.
hmm,
Maybe this is not the case for sound or for voices or for music. What's been your experience from the technical side of things?
yeah. Well, from the technical side of things, it works good. Also for music, I have an example which I tried because I'm diving into the AI, of course, because it's coming anyhow.
Mm.
So I had a small project, which I thought the project hasn't got the budget to make it, yeah, available for like a good music production. But if I didn't deliver the music production, it would be nothing
Empty.
special. And yeah, so there I was looking for a really old Baroque music, Renaissance choir. Um, and I couldn't hire a whole choir in the studio to record that because of the budget problems. And so I went to some of those AI tools. I think it was Suno.ai, and used a prompt. Um, and there it became something that was really on the background, but it lifted the whole production, and it became available, and it was usable. And the project was, yeah, it was better than when I didn't use it. And probably anyone and my client could hear it as well, and they will think about the next round if they have budget available to record much more higher quality choirs, for example. They should
Mhm.
then it's available. So you're opening doors as well in the AIs.
This is another interesting point you're making. There is always like this the evaluation of this AI generated content always kind of like stop the moment the project is delivered. But what you're saying is that, well, since now they had the chance to get a taste
Yeah,
of what that means, then next time there's like, oh, this is okay, let's invest more, or maybe let's do another project with Sphere of Sound because they were able to deliver this package, and maybe we can ask for more,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
So I think this is another very important thing. I am curious now. So we have discussed a little bit about what are these properties of sound. We have discussed, on the other hand, about how can we get those sounds, right? Either we recorded, libraries, or maybe AI generated. By the way, maybe before we get into it, I realize, do you have maybe some tools that you could recommend to people that are, let's say, have performed good enough based on your experience when it comes to generating sounds with AI?
Well, generating sounds with AI, not really, because then I like to be in control of the sounds I
Mhm.
use from recordings I know, and put them on top of each other. Because if I use different sounds with different qualities, then it could be bad. Also, with the music AI, I found that there is a if there's a voice in it, there's a lot of noise also into it. So if you use it as a background a
Mm.
music sample, it's no problem. So on the AI side of things, there aren't that many tools that I would recommend. Although for voiceovers, and I haven't, yeah, I've been playing with it for 11 Labs, for example. It's a voice AI. I work a lot with voice actors, and they now try. If we plan a schedule a recording, then I always get an agreement that I wouldn't use their sound for AI. That's also one thing. But it could be handy for just the small changes if the recording um, just need to adapt with names or of places that aren't correct. Then AI could be a helpful tool to correct those little words in a whole script, and it becomes then a tool, an edit tool, which you can use. Yeah, instead
Right.
of having the voice, for example, over the whole AI. Yeah.
I wanted to have a quick break to remind you that if you like this conversation, you should check all past episodes at xraispotlight.com. Also, if you don't want to miss anything, remember to subscribe to the XR AI Spotlight newsletter, and you will immediately get an updated list with over 200 mixed reality apps you can filter from various fields, weekly in-depth interviews, and one product spotlight personally tested by me right in your mailbox every week. And now, let's get back to the show. So going back to what I was saying, so now we got these sounds, whatever they've been recorded or downloaded or whatever it is, and
Yeah.
then on the other side we have all these properties, right? We mentioned
Mm.
occlusion, reverb, intensity, distance, and so on. How do we put it in an immersive experience? How do we make it happen? Are there some SDK or something that would help people deploy this sound in their experiences?
Yeah. Yeah, it depends totally on the target and on the devices, which the sound or the immersive experience are going to be played. I do a lot of sound and spatial audio productions for virtual reality, and those type of experiences are usually 360 videos or game environments, and then we use like Unity Engine or Unreal. So. Um, and the workflow is there that I do first does research on the and it's the pre-production phase where I get to know the target audience, the goal of the whole experience. Then I make a production plan. Um, if it's like a shoot on location, I have to go there to see if it's silent enough to record audio there, or do I have to use like libraries. Um, Then at the recordings itself, I use the ambisonic mic. I make a bed layer of ambisonic recordings. Ambisonic is a format where sounds being captured from all directions, and I can use that as a bed layer. And on top of that, I place mono and stereo sound sources to make it more interesting. And when we are in the production phase, then I use like a DHW. It's a digital audio workstation. That are tools like Pro Tools or Nuendo or Reaper. Or for music production, I use a lot of Ableton. And then it's building all those soundscapes within in those DAWs. And then most of the times I render an ambisonic file, a higher order ambisonic file, because that's much wider. And I can use that as a whole for a 360 video, for example, or I use a simple first order ambisonic file and place it in Unity as a bed layer. And on top of that, I take the mono sources and stereo sources and I add them as an audio source into the Unity game environment. And in Unity, I make a lot of use of the Atmo key through spatial technology. Because I think and I find that's the best sounding spatializer at the moment. And you got several tools for that, but I'm really convinced that's a high quality SDK.
So,
But
can you say the name again? And let's say, what are some of the things you can play with? So you mentioned a spatializer. Like, what are the things that you can do with that specific SDK that makes it your preferred one?
yeah, well, you can it's the Atmoki True Spatial tool, and we use it as a package, for example, within VRelax as well. You can play with occlusion, you can play with reverberation, you can play with the focus points. So like the sound source could be hypercardioid or it could be omni, so it's all around, or it comes from a specific direction. You can prioritize it as well, so that are really you're really in control of how it sounds. Yeah. But
And to go, did you want to add something?
yeah, the source, the sound source you've recorded or you used or you designed with within the DHW, that's of course most important. That has to be high quality.
Right. And so you mentioned a couple of things before, like, for example, also like occlusion, or maybe the place in which that sound is played. For example, imagine a room against a cave or against other environment. Is that something that SDK also manages?
Um, you mean like the reverberation of the?
Yeah, that being one. The other was, you mentioned occlusion, right? So, for example, if there is
Yeah.
like a fabric in
Yeah.
front of that, then might sound a bit damped.
Yeah, occlusion. They play with occlusion, but it's more kind of. I don't know exactly what algorithm they use, but it's something like a high cut filter. But the materials. I've mentioned it at Atmoki. I hope they will edit the kind of different kind of reverberation. That's a wish. If that's good, and you can add it on top of the spatializer, then it becomes real. You can play in Unity with different reverb zones, for example, if you have like a 6D degrees of freedom game.
Right.
Yeah. Then
So anything else that, let's say, that people say, okay, now I've heard from Jelmer that sound is important. What are some things that people can do straight away to improve that sound? So either from, let's say, the places they get them, there may be the approach to sound at the beginning, or the way they implement it in the final app. Can you give maybe some low hanging fruit that people can use to improve?
Yeah, the first, I think, and it's really important, is to think about sound. Just listen to your environment, and the thought. We're so used that there's always sound, right? We always hear. We can't close our ears like we can close our eyes, for example. If even if we sleep, we hear. Um, and it's so common we never think about when some sound has to be created, and for virtual environments there is no sound at all, so it has to be created. And then we can think of okay, what's the goal of the sound? Does it has like a functional matter? Should we does it has to be an activator? An alarm clock, for example, is an activator. Every morning we wake up, we get a doses of cortisol in our body just because of the sound of an alarm clock. But also, it helps if you have like the chips in Holland. If it doesn't crackle, your taste is less, for example. So it and all that kind of so the functional things, how you can use sound in your environment and how it can contribute at the virtual environment. That should be convincing, and the sound is connecting the virtual environment with the persons in it. If you think about that and you listen to your environment for a while, then you can automatically are going to act like it. And I think that's the low hanging fruit. Just think about it. Just not getting into the production, making the game. No, uh, get an audio designer as soon as you start a project to think about all those types of functional meanings. Uh, the goal of the immersive experience. Yeah, I think
So
that's the low hanging fruit. Yeah.
yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think we also have been kind of like discussing or somehow implying that we are thinking about immersive games, right? Because that's, of course, a lot of what the content is out there. But of course, like there are ways that sound can enhance immersive experience that go beyond gaming, right? So what are maybe some example of properties in which sounds can be used beyond just the shooter or zombie title?
Yeah. Well, a lot. For me, at VRelax, we did like an art installation last year at South by Southwest, for example. It was like a video projection with sound and with touch, but also with sound, having speakers around the whole experience, and it was like a loop of only 5 minutes, but due to the spatial audio, people stayed in there for half an hour because every time they heard something different. And yeah, and that's a kind of experience, a live experience, where you can use sound in a way that's it's really yeah.
And actually, this is very important because sometimes it's always people want to say why is it worth it to do, for example, to invest in sound, and sometimes they think that the visual, the interaction is what keeps people in. But you just gave an example where retention on an experience, right, that is also important metrics when we look at let's say the value that something provides.
Mhm.
It was enhanced purely by the sound. Of
Yes.
course there was also a visual elements by far, so it's not wouldn't exist alone, but how that helped to also retain people inside.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, but also, and that's for an art installation. But you can imagine an audio tours when you have to give information about an art piece, for example. You could use one voice that's telling a story, but if you telling the story with an immersive sound experience, it will make more impact. If you place the voice in a head and you have your focus on something else, you won't get it. You don't hear what they are saying. But if you have the voice being externalized, so it's like another person is talking to you, and then you're much more focused on what that person says, and so um, you better understand what they are saying. It's being memorized much more. So that are all advantages with audio. And then playing audio in audio tours is yeah, it's huge. increase of the whole experience there. But also for mental wellness, like we do at VRelax, having placing people with telepresence in other nature environments. If the sound isn't real, people aren't connecting to that environment and only see visuals, and don't get relaxed or not that fast. But if everything is correct and the environment and the sound environment is convincing, people are in virtual or have a sense of telepresence within seconds, within 1 minute, and then
Were you
people are.
able to measure this somehow? Because it's kind of like tricky sometimes, right? To say, so, okay, if you have sounds, people get immersed or forget about the real world faster.
Yeah.
Is that something that you could measure? If so, how did you measure it?
um yeah, we have like a research going on, and it was like the short term, and with VRelax they were it was a stress reduction of 40% if they have like 20 minutes use of within 10 minutes using VRelax. They had like a stress decrease with 40%. So that's huge. And now we're doing research at the long term. And I've been there, as one of the co-founders. So at the beginning, so all of our environments are in capturing those spatial audio environments as well. I haven't compared it with other relax environments, so I can't make a comparison with that. Um, and we are currently having like feedback forms filling in by how people perceive with sound or without sound. And the recent small research we did was that the sound makes a huge difference for the convincing part of being in that environment. If it can't be measured how the stress will relate to that, but it's logical. If you have like a stress reduction of 40% within 10 minutes, if you are in a telepresence environment, then sound must also be a huge part, play a huge part of that whole experience.
Yeah. So then in this case, right? So we are also trying to justify the value of sound, right?
Mhm.
And it's hard to quantify. So we have mentioned, for example, about retention. Someone stays longer because just likes this experience.
Yeah.
Or the other case you mentioned, they get more immersed, maybe faster, and so consequently, the whole delivery of that telepresence, as you describe in a immersive environment, is
Yeah.
just stronger. Now, how do you personally try to kind of like pitch or sell, let's say, the importance of sound when you're, for example, talking to a client?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. It's always a struggle, of course, because most people know the value of sound, but they have to be remembered of it. They need to be activated or to link or to think about it. Um, and that's what I earlier said. Because sound is always on, we can't close our ears. It's always there, so we expect that it's always there. Even if we record a video, we don't think about to record the sound separately because we think, well, there is sound, right? So for virtual environments, of course, there isn't. So that's easier to sell that you need like sound designs. But it's also an example. Think about your favorite movie and think about it, how it would be without sound. Then the whole
It
experience.
wouldn't. It wouldn't be the movie. I think it would just be another
Exactly.
experience, probably.
And it's a really simple but good example of how important sound can be and what kind of role it plays. Um, and then for spatial audio, it's not just a technical enhancement, but it's a fundamental aspect of how we perceive and connect with those virtual environments. So it has to be there. What people don't understand is the amount of work it takes to create a convincing and real lifelike sound environment. Because you have, like I said, to the pre-production, you have to do the production phase, all the building of the soundscapes. You have to do the mixing, you have to do the mastering, so it sounds good on all different devices, and that's where people need to be convinced that the amount of work it takes and time it takes, and that it's a profession to create those sounds. Yeah, that's most of the time I need to tell them. Yeah,
Right, right. So it's not hard to say, because you can use that analogy about the movie. What is a movie without the sound, the music, the voiceovers, and so on? That is easy to get, but get them to understand the amount of work needed. That's the toughest part,
yeah,
basically.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
I would like to ask you one more question, and that is about the way sound is becoming part of our lives, right? So we live in a world that is where this digital content, including sound, is now becoming part of our physical world, right? It's how often you see now people with headphones, with earbuds.
yeah.
It's the fact that now there are these other kind of sound devices, for example, the induction, I believe they are called, right? No, the bone
Oh,
conduction, for
conduction.
example,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, and there are AR glasses,
yeah.
right? That also start playing a role in terms of notifications, or at some point there will be more of it, right?
Mhm.
So, what do you think are the challenges we will encounter while that sound gets more present in our physical world?
Um, the challenges. Oh, that's that's a good question. I think. Well, let me start with the amount of how many people now work or walk with headphones and noise canceling headphones, for example. Uh, it has all to do with the noise pollution going on, especially in cities. Everything above 65 decibels, if you are staying longer there than 50 minutes, your stress levels increase, for example. So people also, and especially younger people, have a lot to do with all the geopolitical instability, um, and yeah, they are finding now that that they can use sound, music, noise, for example, to feel good and use it for
Mhm.
mental well-being as well. So the quality of those headphones and noise canceling headphones, I think that they are going to increase even more. And I'm pretty convinced, that's why I started my Sphere of Sound company, that spatial audio is becoming much and much more important to have a convincing sound and experience. Even if you listen to music, a good mixed spatial audio production, then I'm pretty convinced that those people who listen to that are convinced to use it more often. So I think in that aspect, the Dolby Atmos headphones, for example, or spatial audio headphones will become more and more available. Bone conduction is also an interesting aspect because you can use it for listening to music as a kind of AR tool. You know, if you have like a buddy walking beside you, you're using binaural audio, for example, on those bone, you can hear your environment because your ears aren't, yeah, there's nothing in
Included.
front of it. Yeah, exactly. Um, so bone conduction would be really helpful to get a sense of AR sounds, for example. And then the other way is that the VR goggles at the moment, like the Pico and the Quests, haven't really invested lately in new hardware, except for the Apple Pro Vision. It was a dedicated speaker system with double drivers into it. But even Meta has been cutting on the research lab, so on the hardware side of it. So I truly hope they are going to invest in new speaker system because, yeah, even the Pico, there was like the Pico 2, I think. They got the speakers under. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, really strange. Not thinking about the whole sound and
because I think also that when we are going to move into this world where sound in different form, right, will also, if we are wearing these glasses, or maybe we have another device, right, and maybe we want to ask question to an AI, maybe that question has an answer that is spatialized, right? For example, hey, yes, turn right. If that thing comes from the right, then it's where, for example, you will look at it, right? Because you have that connection.
Exactly.
The other thing I've seen, and if I remember correctly, there was also like other technologies and techniques that use AI to shield sound only in an area of around us,
Yeah.
right? So that also means that if you are in a restaurant, maybe you are able to mute the people behind you, but still hear the people that are in front of you.
Yeah.
So I think that these all generate, we are going to have a situation where sounds will play a much bigger role, much functional role, that it just goes beyond the, let's say, immersion of well-being, because we will have the techniques and the technology to position it, to silence it, that right now are just emerging. Right? You mentioned this bone conduction one. That is a very interesting. I didn't think about it. It's a way to augment the local sound around you because you are still not occluded. So
Absolutely.
I think that this is very fascinating, and also I think people should start thinking about that, because we think about glasses and we think about digital content that floats, but what about the sound that is going to be located in a crowded, by definition, right?
Yeah.
Okay, unless you are
Absolutely.
at home, you are around, and that's, I think it's going to be a very interesting challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And like in the early days, the architecture would be counting on that there was no like PA system. So in old cathedrals, and there was a specific place for the choir to stand, and the whole natural acoustic, so that the choir was audible in the whole space. That kind of architecture isn't made anymore. So we now make all new technological stuff, to help us getting other new improvements for the sound. You know what I'm saying? It's I can hardly
No,
explain, but
no, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it makes sense. So now at that point, humans will evolve with the technology and come up with
yeah,
new ways of delivering that value, being that sound over the preacher, or maybe the musical instrument, right, that is in this that position on one place or instead of another, and then opening up indeed other opportunities. So I'm pretty sure that similar things will happen, and probably also are already happening right now. So Jelmer, thank you very much. I really appreciate this conversation. I really learned a lot. I'm pretty sure that people now know how to approach sound and look at it in a different way. So thank you very much.
no problem. If they have any questions about sound, you can reach me on LinkedIn or on my website. No problem.
Absolutely. Bye-bye, Jelmer.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you very much for listening in. If you like the show, please leave a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or a thumbs up on YouTube. It really means a lot to me, and it's a great support for the show. Till next time.